The Illuminating the Unseen video series preserves the history of the Old North Church in the North End of Boston.
It's part of a broader initiative that started at Old North in 2019 when discoveries were made about Captain Newark Jackson, who had been a congregant and someone that our historic chocolate program had been named for. The staff learned that not only had he been an enslaver himself, but he had also been a human trafficker, and he had been killed in a mutiny while he was transporting several enslaved children. It really brought forward deep conversations about how we would respond to that.
And we know a lot of the history of some of the early English parishioners at the church. We especially, of course, know the story of Paul Revere's Ride and the signal lanterns. And the folks here wanted to tell a broader story of the church's history, which also included people of African descent, who we believe sat up here in the gallery, which is where I'm sitting right now.
In some ways, we're very lucky because the church kept great records over time. But when it comes to the identities and experiences of our Black and Indigenous congregants, it's a much lighter record. We might have baptisms, weddings, burials, things like that, but we don't really have a lot of details in between.
I started interrogating some of the stories of African and also Indigenous peoples who show up in the church's records. They show up being bought and sold and on the ships of some of the people who were here. We're living in a time where there's so much pushback against critical thinking and critical race theory and all of that. And it's important for us to be able to see documents for ourselves and to come to our own conclusions about them. During the British colonial period, Reverend Dr. Timothy Cutler, the church's first rector, unreservedly participated in the work of conversion. He stated that most inhabitants were white planters and merchants, whom he called the masters. Another group in the colonies was white servants, including people who served voluntarily and people who were transported to the colonies as prisoners. The inhabitants of the colonies also included Indigenous people, whom he described as servants, and Black people, who he said were, quote, slaves for life.
The vision of Old North Illuminated is a future in which all Americans can see their stories, hopes, and struggles reflected in places of prominence and in a shared national history.
Seeing people listed in the records just as, for example, Negro slave girl, what am I supposed to do with that? And so piecing together those stories and figuring out methods to try to determine even who is this person. I also wondered about the families that seem to baptize many of their members at once. Look, for example, at the Gray family, who baptize people of many ages. However, even in that large family, a name remains unknown. One of the children's names is listed as female.
Something that Jamie has done so well with Illuminating the Unseen is just presenting the information in a way that helps people understand how she found what she's finding, how she interpreted it.
Beulah Speen was a mixed-race woman who was married by Old North's assistant rector, Reverend James Grayton, in 1767. Speen emerged in archival records for the first time when she was born on May 12, 1743. It is curious that Speen's birth record failed to note her race because the Old North Church's marriage records overtly stated that she was not a white person. As I look at these records, I wonder, how does a person, over the course of 24 years, gravitate from seemingly being a white person to becoming a free mixed race person? It's exciting to see the ways that other groups can also see their stories reflected here, a way that is both exciting on the activism level, but also the way that inspires, hopefully, future research.
The response from our visitors has been really overwhelmingly positive. I think what we're seeing is people, for the most part, understand that what we learned in history class may not have been the full truth.
It can be really challenging to look back at the past and see stories that we don't necessarily like. When we learn more about these hard histories and we think about perhaps the harm that we're doing in our world, it helps us to become better humans.